I'm Charles Pulman. I bring greetings from Dallas. I want to cover what we in Dallas are doing about Hasbara. And the point that I'm going to make is that we in Dallas have decided to take this from the other side. And the other side meaning that we're going not to respond to the narrative, but we're going to address the narrative. In Dallas, just as background, we have a large Palestinian population. You might have, a couple of years ago, heard about a trial of the Holy Land Foundation. That was a Islamic charity that was funding Hamas that the U.S. government went after and shut them down. And we also have a large chapter of CARE, the Council of American Islamic Relations, of which I attended one of their meetings. I can't go into it today, but I can tell you it must have been what was like in sitting in the beer hall in Munich in 1933. And this occurred in Dallas. I don't need to finish yet. So let's go back for a minute to the flotilla that occurred at the end of May of 2010. We woke up one morning and we heard about what was going on from CNN. In the Dallas community, and then nothing, the Dallas Jewish community said nothing at first. The Palestinians had a rally on the grassy knoll where President Kennedy was assassinated. The Jewish Federation of Dallas said, don't go. That's all I need to hear. I went. And I stood on the opposite side of the street from a large Palestinian rally. And I stood amongst people waving an Israeli flag and blowing a shofar. They were Messianic Jews. The Jewish community had not shown up. Rumbling started to occur. So the Jewish Community Federation decided to have a gathering at a synagogue. And 1,000 people showed up. And everyone went inside and closed the door, and there were police outside. And for an hour, we all sung Kumbaya, and we felt very good. By the time I got home, I started getting calls. I am pretty active with regard to Israel advocacy and speaking. The community was outraged. People wanted to march. I got called by the president of the Jewish Federation that said, come to a board meeting, tell us what you want to do. In 60 days, we planned the first ever outdoor downtown Dallas Israel celebration. The picture on the screen, can you see that? Just barely. Can you dim the lights a little? Was held at the American Airlines Arena. We had booths, tents, organizations. We put out word to every Jewish and pro-Israel organization in the United States. The Israel Project was there. We had that day over 5,000 people who came to show their support of Israel. And there was one thing that was very significant about that day. It was 106 Fahrenheit. It turned out, to my chagrin, to be the hottest day of the year. You know, it couldn't have been the day before, which was Shabbos, so we wouldn't have had it, or the day next, that day. You can see here the people that were there, of all colors. It wasn't just Jewish people. It was people who deeply felt support of Israel, who were affected by what was occurring in the media in the summer of 2010 about the flotilla and wanted to come out to show their support. The JNF was there. This is one of the booths that was represented. We were highlighting the positive things about Israel. We were highlighting the accomplishments that Israel has given to the world. We had government officials, Mr. Sharansky, for example, who did a personalized video and that we showed at the event. We distributed Israeli flags. We wanted people to feel good. This was not an event about delegitimization. This was an event about Israel and about the positive contributions that Israel has made to the world. And even though it was 106 all day, everyone stayed. There was dancing. And keep in mind, we planned this in 60 days. But what it showed is that if you highlight the positive aspects of Israel, the Hasbara, people will turn out in droves in support of Israel. Hadassah. Just normal people. One of the things we did is that we reached out to the non-Jewish community. In this picture, this lady here is a pastor of an evangelical church outside of Fort Worth. Her church is a member of CUFI. CUFI is Christians United for Israel. She alone brought 2,000 people. When I introduced her, people in the audience started clapping and cheering. And I assure you, it was not the Jewish people in the audience. The man sitting next to her was a rabbi. The mayor of Dallas was there. And the consul general from Israel in Houston showed up. He had just taken the job. It was unbelievable. These people stayed all afternoon to hear speakers, to participate in the dancing, to look at the booths, to send telegrams back to the IDF, and everything else that went into it. I co-chaired it, and what I did was I found people who could pull this off. And they did, and it was successful. What I learned from this is a comment that was made earlier today. We have nothing to be ashamed of. We don't have to make excuses. Is Israel perfect? No. Do we want Israel to be perfect? Well, maybe yes, but it would never be. It's a nation of humans. But we have to focus on the positive things. And what I was hearing from the people in Dallas, young and old, was that they didn't want a rally. They didn't want a situation where the speakers came up and talked about the Palestinians and the flotilla, etc. They wanted to celebrate Israel, and that's what was done. As a result of that event, I and a few other people in Dallas began to think, how can we effect the narrative? And we came up with an idea. We're going to run a billboard campaign. And we developed this billboard. We have placed this billboard along major highways and freeways in Dallas. It goes up for 30 days. We put it up on the highways where it's heavily traveled with rush hour. And people have to look at it. We've not asked them to do anything. We didn't ask them to write letters. We didn't ask them to give money. We asked them to think about, why does Israel matter to you? Israel preserves the Holy Land for all. I went around in my office and asked the non-Jews about that statement. The first time I drafted it, it said Israel protects the Holy Land for all. They didn't like the word protect. It was militaristic. So we changed it to preserve. And among some of the secretaries and the staff in my office, I know that if I had put a map of Israel alone in front of them and said, where's Israel, they couldn't find it. But when I asked them, where's the Holy Land, they all knew. Now, I realize Dallas is conservative, but they knew where the Holy Land is. And we formed a nonprofit organization called Why Israel Matters. And it's located at whyisraelmatters.net. This is a grassroots initiative to get to the common person. AIPAC reaches Congress. AJ Committee reaches other governments. ADL has their role. Israel Project has the media. And I asked myself, who's reaching the ordinary person? Because you know what? Right now, Congress is very supportive of Israel. We saw that when the Prime Minister of Israel came and spoke at Congress. But I have this concern that if we lose the American public, which today is 71% favorable to Israel, Congress will flip. Make no mistake, I, having once been a politician, politicians are in office with one goal, to stay in office. And they play to their constituents. But I have also taken upon myself something else. Since last March, I have spoken at over 15 churches in the Texas area. Not just evangelical. You know, you don't have to ask the evangelicals if they support Israel. I've been to the Methodists and the Lutherans and the Baptists and the Catholics. And I've spoken to their Sunday school classes. They want to know about Israel. They want to know about the history. They want to better understand this conflict. And in every talk I've had, the overwhelming majority of the people have been supportive of Israel. Is it 100% support? No. They ask fair questions. What about the Palestinians and the future of a Palestinian state? But they want to know about Israel. And almost every time, and granted, I'm speaking to church groups, they tell me, we support Israel because it says so in the Bible. And that's okay with me. And I've learned that if we stand up, we have a story to tell. And the bond between Israel and America is a strong bond. But we cannot take it for granted. As the comment was made earlier, we have to strengthen our allies. The Palestinian Authority has hired a PR firm out of London. There's a concern in the United States that they're targeting some of our strongest allies, like the evangelicals. And we have to do more. And we have to sell the positive things, and I would suggest to you, we have to sell why Israel matters to the ordinary person. You know, there's a million reasons why Israel matters. It's not just because out of Israel came the pill with the camera in it and all other great things. It's because my best friend lives there. Just very, very simple reasons, but we have to personalize this issue. And the other thing that I just want to conclude with, I have a different view of Mr. Beinhart than expressed in the prior panel. Maybe from an Israeli point of view, Mr. Beinhart doesn't matter. I heard Mr. Beinhart speak last February at the Jewish Federation annual meeting in Colorado. He talked about having a big tent. The young people, Jews and non-Jews, are listening. We have to pay attention. The young people are confused. On a personal level, I know a young girl who grew up in a strong Jewish home, who's been to Israel. She was bat mitzvahed here. She's now a freshman at a university in D.C., and she is taking a Palestinian-Israeli conflict course taught by an American Jewish woman. And this young woman said to me last month, Charles, what is the basis for Israel's existence? Is it only the Bible? I asked her to send me her syllabus. I want to know what she's learning. This is a constant effort we have to keep making. We can take nothing for granted. The bond between the American Jew and the Israeli Jew and the Israeli needs to be strengthened. The name of the conference is the delegitimization of Israel, countering the assault of the delegitimization of the State of Israel. I would suggest to you it's as much as the delegitimization of the Jewish people. Thank you very much for your attention.